right, I want to talk about trauma work today. Trauma work is likely going to be involved in everything that you do at Ascend Counseling. It's likely going to be um, a part of every couple that come in. There's going to be some trauma, and they're going to respond to each other through that trauma. There's likely going to be some kind of interaction between the couple that you can just see they're triggered by each other, and then they get flooded, and then they get just really angry with each other, and it seems to go completely south and completely out of control. And part of the idea of trauma work is helping couples work through the trauma in a way that can transform the relationship into one where they actually help each other when the other one's flooded or triggered. So I want you to think for a second about a couple that you've met with that just scream at each other, like they can't stop this notion that the other one is purposely hurting them. And they say things like, you always, or you never. And they get pretty vicious with each other. And part of that being vicious with each other has to do with their their triggers from historical trauma. Now, couples that have been married a long time are going to start to feel like all of the trauma happened inside of the marriage, but it's likely because over 30 years, all of their fighting and all of their habitual patterns, those problems that are pretty much like you don't solve them, you manage them, those types of problems, they keep responding in the same cycle. They keep responding with the same old core beliefs that you always hurt my feelings, you never help around the house, you are always angry, things like that. And so they say that long enough, it starts to feel like that it began in the marriage. And that's what you have to help them with first, is kind of detaching from those always never beliefs and realizing that, man, some of this trauma could come from their childhood, from attachment breaches. Some of this trauma could come from so many other places, and then have been applied as a defense mechanism in the relationship for so long. And so helping a couple take a step back and talk through using like an emotional focused therapy, or a kind of a restructuring of your cognitive beliefs therapy, some way of helping them step back and identify, label, and then understand the feeling that they're experiencing. Doing this helps the one experiencing the feeling slow everything down and create some cognitive awareness of what's going on in their body, some awareness of how they're reacting. But it also increases the empathy of the lover that's sitting with them. All of a sudden, it's like, oh my gosh, when I do that, it triggers this abuse you suffered at the hands of your father when you were young, or this abuse you suffered from a high school boyfriend, or any number of things. And I guess there is some truth to some of the abuses could have happened in the beginning of a relationship or during a relationship. Whatever it is, to identify that right now, so often we're fighting over things that didn't just occur. We're taking a current experience and then applying 2,500 other little traumas to it. Now, when you're dealing with trauma, also, there's another factor that you want to consider. There is capital T and small letter T traumas, I guess. I don't know that in our client's mind, or when they're experiencing it, it probably all feels like capital T. But we might think through the lens of and again, I hesitate sometimes to look at it this way, but for want of this training, I want to at least pause for a second. The capital T traumas would be like a childhood molestation or rape, or severe domestic violence in front of you as a child. Those capital T traumas imprint super big. They are powerful attachment breaching influences. Small letter T traumas are our experience that was super frightening for us, but may not be scary for anyone else. Like the little kid that falls off his bike and scrapes his knee pretty bad. To some little kids, they just jump back on the bike and it's not real imprinted. They just remember gravel can cause your front tire to buckle and you fall off your bike. While another kid can be terrified of bikes. So that small letter T to the client feels just as big. Sometimes helping them look at how it's subjective to that little kid's experience helps them de-escalate. Now, big letter T experiences that anyone would find a molestation traumatic. So sometimes all of us will be imprinted in a negative, hostile way somehow by that. It's not subjective, really. So realize that with your clients, sometimes we look for just capital T traumas. Be really wary of all of the small letter T traumas that are exploded in a client's mind. And you really have to go there with them. You have to treat it as serious as the client treats it in order for them to feel understood. And so that's just something to keep tucked in the back of your mind. So some ways we do need to step back to and look at the different theories of how our emotions and how our emotions are displayed, or how they come about in our daily behavior. There's all these physiological theories, and you'll have clients come in that really believe that all of their emotions are contained within the body, and these responses, these body memories, these body responses are responsible for how we feel. And so a client will have a body memory around their lower stomach and maybe feel like something's sitting on their chest. And they start describing that and how that is such an anxiety-provoking feeling when they feel that tightness in their stomach and that pressure on their chest. And then as you explore that, you might explore some abuses that they've suffered, where it was maybe some kind of abuse where they were so scared that they felt like they held their breath a long time and it caused that sensation. Or they experienced a sexual abuse where there's a lot of pressure put on their chest and stomach and groin area. And there's so many different avenues, but you'll have clients that really talk through that lens of physiology. So it's always good to adjust your conversation to really address where they hold this emotion in their body, because the goal is to get them to label the emotion. And we don't really care if they feel it first in their body. We don't care if they feel it first somewhere else. What we care about is getting them to label that emotion so that they can start to make some sense of it, because that whole mindfulness pattern of breathing, identifying a feeling, identifying where they hold that feeling, and then identifying what behaviors spring from that feeling is that mindfulness process that's so handy in dealing with trauma and with past traumas. There's also the neurological theories where the activity begins in the brain. This goes all the way back to the Erickson models and the post-Freudian models, where really a lot of the cognitive behavioral therapy springs from activity in the brain leads to emotional response. Now, there's some other stuff involved in CBT, but if we think through the lens of there's a whole group of people out there that really they're very cognitive in how they describe their trauma. Like they use words like, "Well, I think I feel pretty good right now," and so they're not using any feeling words. It's all a very cognitive process. I think I wanted to just run, and so instead of saying I was afraid, they describe it as a I want to run thought. And so to cooperate with that, we change our language a little bit to help them feel understood and to help them start to identify the emotion underlying some of that thought brain activity. Then there's the cognitive theories where we have these thoughts that are stimulated in the brain, and these thoughts generate an emotional response that generates an action. That's pure CBT and then REBT. So we have an originating thought, and that's how we see the world, and when we feel something that's mandatory based upon that thought. And so someone jumps out behind a door and scares me, my first thought is, I'm in danger, I'm going to get hit over the head and maybe attacked physically or sexually. And so I go into fight or flight, and the fear is I am scared half out of my wits. And then my behavior is I start to run or I start to punch, okay? Now, new data comes in. The person that jumped out and screamed is a really good friend. New data says the thought is my friend just scared me. A trick has been pulled on me. The emotional response is maybe some relief. It's my friend. I'm not going to get hurt. And instead of running away, I start to plan my get even, and I laugh with my friend because I don't want him to know how scared he made me. So see how new data can really change how you think, which in that world of cognitive theories changes how you feel, which then changes your actions. And so with emotion-focused therapy, we really want to help client, no matter what language they use, we want to help clients identify and then regulate their emotional response. And so identifying it, especially when we're dealing with core symptoms of complex trauma, identifying and labeling the feeling is really step one. Like so often when you're dealing with couples, the feeling is just maybe contempt, or maybe they feel angry, or maybe they feel amorous. Let's just say it's a couple. It's a husband and a wife, and the husband was molested as a child, and the husband has these needs that make him feel super vulnerable, and so he doesn't like these needs. Like he doesn't like the needs of feeling that he is wimpy, or feeling that he might have the inability to get respect from people, and so feels weak and feels kind of helpless a lot. And let's say that in this spousal interaction, the man that's been sexually abused as a child is just really always using this loud, angry voice to get attention, or to get this feeling of being understood. And let's say the wife in this case comes from a family of origin that was really, they didn't raise their voice, they didn't swear and curse, they were very polite. And, they're the couple that at Thanksgiving, they, politely say a prayer, like people aren't picking up their knives and forks ready to stab people for food. They all fold their arms, and then when the prayer's over, they start taking food off of plates and then passing them around instead of everybody diving to. So they're just a very different family. They have a very calm experience. They have a very soothing dad in the home that talks calmly and never really raises his voice. And so she comes into this relationship with a man that's very kind of feels like he has no respect, no one understands him, no one listens to him. So always goes from maybe a calm voice to a very loud voice when he feels misunderstood. And kind of one of his basic needs that he's trying to get met all the time is to be understood. And it goes all the way back to no one listening to him when he told them about being abused sexually as a child. And he remembers trying to tell his older brother, he remembers trying to tell his mom, and he kind of just got told that, pat him on the head, you just need to not go into the room where the other person that abuses you is. And you kind of picture the scenario, and just is not taken seriously, and so feels like he just kind of shuts down. And then as he gets older, he decides he's not going to be abused anymore, and he decides he'll kill the next person that wants to abuse him. Now, picture a 9-year-old boy that says, I will effing kill you before I let you abuse me again, and then looks at everyone that doesn't understand him as an abuser. And then look at a woman that comes into the relationship with this man that comes from a very peaceful home, that believes in her heart of hearts that when people raise their voice, they're out of control, ugly, and they're not to be, they're not to be put up with. Can you see a conflict about to happen in this couple? So as you're doing the therapy, you notice that she just goes silently raging, and he gets louder and louder when he doesn't feel understood. And so she goes quiet and won't deal with him. And so he gets more aggressive, even to the point of grabbing her by the shoulders and shaking her and screaming, and spittle flying out and hit her in the face. And she's saying, he is so violent. I can't stand him. I don't understand it. I don't like it. I'm not used to it. It makes my whole body just shut down. And he's saying very clearly to you, after you get him to quit yelling at each other, him yelling at her and her just staring out the window, I will not be ignored when I need to be heard. People need to hear me, because in his mind, now he hasn't identified this yet, in his mind, when he's not heard, he's going to get hurt and abused again. And maybe even sexually abused again. It's the most humiliating, most embarrassing, most fear, anger-provoking experiences to get sexually abused as a child, and no one believes you, and everyone just pats you on the head and says, everything's fine, honey. And so he's enraged at not being understood. She's shut down because of the escalating voice. And so you can see the train wreck there. What if you can get him in that moment to tell her, when I was a child, I was sexually abused by a ranch hand on our family ranch. And as I tried to help people save me from that, I got told that I just needed to pipe down. I got told that I needed to not, you know, um, say things like that because people would get in too much trouble. And I really got just pushed aside. And one day I committed to never get pushed aside again. Now, what if she understood that that happened? Do you think she would stare out a window with thin lips and rage going on inside? No. She's going to want to put her arms around him and hear him and comfort him, which is what he needs. But see, he never told her because he was too embarrassed and ashamed to tell her. Can you see how that transforms the whole system? Now, it may take a whole bunch of months of therapy to get him there. Because remember, he's embarrassed about it. And remember, she's angry at him for being loud. And so you first have to get them both to recognize why they're behaving the way they are, what traumas or what experiences in their past did they have to walk through to get to where they're at. He would then understand her more when she says, I shut down, my lips go thin and white, and I look so angry because I am scared to death. My family, my father never raised his voice. I never heard him swear. And the husband over here is thinking, I can't imagine a dad that doesn't swear and scream and yell because that's all I experienced. And he's thinking, I understand you a little bit more, response. And so couples start to look at the system and think about that, the logic of that. It's that they come in most often believing that the other one's the problem. How many times have you had a couple want you to just tell the other person that they're wrong and we'll be okay? Just explain to my wife that she's got to quit like screaming at me every time I'm late getting home from work. Versus how do you behave when she yells at you that keeps that really keeps her entrenched in you don't understand me, so I've got to escalate. And then you're escalating because you believe you're misunderstood. But think about it. How many times can you escalate with people and they really think that, oh, I think I will cooperate now that you're escalating because that was my goal. So if you can help them see the system, they both begin to kind of laugh at themselves and find the humor in what they thought would work. It's so interesting to look at a person and say, okay, so let me get this straight. You're saying that when you escalate to a louder with horrible language and point your finger, your lover over here is supposed to feel safe to calm down and tell you how much he loves you and that he's sorry for being late. And they just laugh saying, okay, well, of course that's not going to work. But when they're caught in the middle of it and both of them out competing the other to be right, there's really not room for that. And so once you restructure that way of looking at each other and then start to consolidate the emotions with the behaviors and how they trigger their partner, and then it's reciprocated, they can start the consolidation of a new relationship. And so if we remember in couples counseling that much of what we're doing is helping couples get their needs met. So if you go all the way back to that training on creating a governing purpose, and if you keep that on the forefront, maybe even have it written down for the clients or have them have it in a notebook. I've got these little journals that I have clients keep where you have little stick figures drawn of a man and a woman. And under the stick figures, there's top 10 needs to be happy. And they put things like companionship, love, intimacy, sex, vacations. I mean, they've got these needs and wants listed. That is such a handy list. And if you remember that all of us have thousands of needs, thousands and thousands. And most of how we move through life and communicate with others is different ways of getting these needs met. And I want you to make it okay to have needs. It's not selfish to have needs. We can be selfish in how we get our needs met, but it's pretty human to just simply have needs. And so I'd like you to work on the basis that these human emotions that people are feeling are connected to the needs that they have, okay? And so to increase awareness of their emotions and what need that they are trying to get met. So in the case of the spouse screaming at the other spouse for being late and saying that they're always late and the dinner's always ruined, or they need help and their spouse is not getting home in time to help them. And they believe that my need that I want to get met is cooperation, love, and support from my spouse. And so I'm going to scream at him. To help them be aware of what they're doing is kind of a step. Now, you can't shame them over that, but to help them find the humor in that is really handy. And so they can't regulate that emotion until they recognize the need they want to get met, and then the underlying way that they've decided to be triggered to get that need met. And if they can identify that and then acquire some different skills in getting that need met. So picture spouse that has the other spouse coming in late. Spouse walks in. Let's say that the wife in this case is going to come over, give her husband a great big hug, thank him for coming home, and then saying that she needs to talk about how to be better at getting home on time or when he promises. And he apologizes at that point for being late, and maybe even being late again, and states, I need to be more honest in that I don't figure in travel time. When I leave the office, I say I'll be home in a couple of minutes, and you're making some assumptions that I'm maybe already on the road, and I'm thinking, well, I still have to pack my briefcase, and I still have to talk to the front desk people before I leave the office, and I generally get asked 4 questions as I try to walk out. So I'm a half hour before I even get to the vehicle, and then I'm another half hour home, and I've said I'll be home in a few minutes, but it's an hour. So if I'm more honest with you, you'll have a more clear picture of when I'm getting there. So when couples start to do this, they start to regulate the emotion by facing the emotion. And so that's that transforming of the emotion into adaptive behaviors versus the maladaptive ones is that key, okay? And so helping couples identify the traumas, identify what's going on in their world, and then identify the feeling attached to it, and then identify how that is acted out today is important. When we deal with couples or individuals in couples that are really struggling, what we see so often is, let's say, some childhood abuse that has caused or happy, whatever it is, they believe that it's a direct result of something their partner has done to them, something their partner has triggered in them. And both good and bad, they seem to feel pretty out of power of those feelings. Well, when you help a person identify their feelings and identify their response to those feelings, it really helps. It helps the client be empowered to behave how they choose to behave inside of the relationships. And imagine if both parties of a relationship had a therapist that took time to go back and forth and understand what they were feeling when they acted out. Now, this takes an act of Congress sometimes with clients that are just out of control. There's times where there's 2 or 3 strategies that I use that seem effective for a lot of really high conflict couples. And one is just let them scream, let them just kind of help them by sitting there doing nothing while they act out in front of you. Now, it takes a brave therapist to sit with that intensity. It takes a lot of energy because you're going to feel it. That countertransference in the room is you're going to feel all of this anger, maybe all of this violent thoughts, because what they're feeling is going to be permeating the room. And so part of your task is to be able to sit with that with them. And at some point in that, one of them is going to look at you and say, are you going to help? And you calmly say, I will, but I can't yell over you. You both need to hold on a second and let me work with you each on identifying what was going on. Most often, couples will be either a tiny bit embarrassed and they'll let you jump in, or they'll kind of laugh at themselves for acting out. But one way or the other, they'll let you then start to work with each of them on identifying what the feeling was, where the feeling came from, identifying it, and then really de-escalating it. And so, she might say, well, he always just is such a jerk to me. And so you help identify where the word always comes from. You ask, is there a time where, this goes to the maybe the solution focus, is there any exceptions to that where you can identify times like yesterday that they weren't just a jerk to you? And they go, yeah, okay, so it wasn't always. Can we take it down a notch from always to you experienced that just now? And that's the first step in really helping them de-escalate by identifying how they're feeling. And then to move them from you always to I felt. That has a whole bunch towards pushing the feeling into proper, I felt disrespected just now, instead of you always treat me bad. You see the difference between the energy that will come from those two sentences. Now, you're going to have to do this over and over again with each party when they act out, and it gets monotonous. And you have to remind the clients that that our opinion, there's so many theories out there that I feel like they don't dare say this, but our opinion with high conflict couples that finally make it to therapy on the verge of divorce is a 1 to 2 year process. It's not a 6 sessions done. It's a long marathon process of lots of hours of work with a coach, and then lots of homework that they do and come back and report on, and then lots of time spent going a month without therapy after the first 6 or 7 months, and then coming back in for a month, and then there's all kinds of constellations that we can work on with clients. But the idea is, we need to create this mental expectation that this is a marathon, not a sprint. We're not going to give you 2 tools and you guys are great. We're going to work on the complex trauma. We're going to work on de-escalating the trauma. We're going to work on treating each other with mutual respect and reciprocating these approaches of helping them de-escalate and then really communicate. And so you're going to do that over and over again with couples. And if you start the process without warning them, they're going to start to feel like, well, we just don't belong together after 6 months. We've been here 6 months. I don't know how many times I've had couples say, well, we've been doing this since February. That's 6 months. And I'll remind them, saying, remember in February, I told you it was a couple of years. It was a couple of year process. And you guys got here through a lot of years of acting out. And we're going to take, and so you just help them like, oh, okay, we still have hope. And so that really helps a couple. And so if you're looking at this like I'm talking, you've got this this knowledge that you can see what the clients are doing, and you can help them really assess what they're doing right now and assess where that came from. And then really you start that process of restructuring the relationship. Excuse me. That will get edited out, I'm sure. Restructuring that bond after you stabilize them and get them thinking about their role has a lot to do with helping the couple, instead of the you always and you, it's, all right, so here's how I was feeling. Here's what I did. Here's what I did that triggered you. And then here's what I noticed you did in response, because you're not used to a man yelling and getting in your face, and I'm not. I made a commitment at 9 to never let anyone ignore me. And she understands where he's coming from. He understands where she's coming from. Then they can take the now and the tomorrow's now and the next day's now and know something about each other. And when he sees her do what she does when she gets scared, he all of a sudden remembers, oh, I just did something that caused, at least in part, that. And she can say, when he raises his voice, it's because I'm not understanding him in a way that he believes he's understood. Can you see how that empathy piece is going to really go a long ways towards solving the ills that they're feeling towards each other? I know it sounds simple as I describe it here. I get that. But I want you to understand how difficult this is, this mindfulness pattern. So I'm going to break it down for you and really kind of like, you identify the conflict, right? They're screaming at each other. She's shutting down and going to a look of contempt. He's getting more and more escalated. So in this case, that's the conflict, and that's the issue you're watching. You identify that the negative interaction is he wants to be understood and she wants to be in a calm, peaceful place while she talks. And so he starts to understand that my emotions are attached to this childhood abuse, and she's starting to understand that her emotions are attached to a childhood where a father would never raise his voice, and she felt so safe there and so unsafe here. And then they reframe it to where she recognizes in the system, when he feels not listened to, not understood, it is so scary because he believes that's what leads to being molested again. And in his adult mind, he doesn't really fear molestation anymore, but he does fear humiliation. He does fear being belittled. He does fear that commitment to never let that happen again is being threatened. And then he understands that she is not willing to like communicate well when everything's screaming and yelling, because she's not going to join him in that. She's going to shut down instead. So once they reframe it as you're doing this to me to we're experiencing this, you've got a whole different interaction between the two. The couple then can start the process of restructuring the relationship. So when they recognize what the other one needs, when they recognize that he needs to be understood, remember those needs lists? And he recognizes that she needs peaceful communication, not screaming. They can start to like identify the wants and the needs of their partner. They can start to encourage and accept why their partner's behaving the way that they are. Imagine when she understands at a very deep level that him feeling misunderstood is going to push him completely out the door. Once she understands that, she can create a new way of interacting with him. He can create a new way of interacting with her the minute he understands that when he is misunderstood and screams, she doesn't understand him even more. So it goes the opposite way. He gets more misunderstood. So he recognizes, when I calmly talk with you about what I'm experiencing, you really do listen. And that starts a whole new cycle of behavior. So they're telling different stories about each other. Instead of you always yell at me, it's I think I just made you feel misunderstood and I didn't mean to do that. Let me start over. That's a new cycle. That's going on a new story. Can you see how that new cycle of behavior is such a key to this couple being healthy and happy moving forward? So 5 things here in closing, now that you understand trauma work and how to deal with people's emotions, and I hope at a deeper level. Number 1, really help a couple, help each individual avoid overgeneralizing. You never understand me would change to I feel misunderstood right now. Recognize the negative emotions that spring from the generalization, you always, you never. If you can help a couple do that, that's going a long ways towards changing those cycles. If you can teach each of them to be more compassionate, imagine if the man that we've been talking about does not feel like he's worthless, doesn't feel like no one respects him. If he feels like just right now, the way we're going at this, I'm being misunderstood, that would go a long ways. If both of them could work on being compassionate, work on like treating the other with compassion because they're feeling it for themselves, it helps. So that self-compassion talk, that you telling them that they're both champions, you doing all you can to give them unconditional positive regard, and teach through your example, even when they're like obnoxious and antisocial in front of you. If you could teach them how much you love them and how much you care for them and how much you care for the relationship, it'll go a long ways towards that therapeutic bond, and then modeling for them how to join each other through compassion and through compassionate thoughts. Take a step back from the situation. Teach them not to jump to conclusions. Like the minute she says something like, you always treat me bad, step back and don't really react to the word always. If you can teach them to like read underneath what's going on, like why would she say that? Does she really hate you? Oh no, she said that because I have been late a lot, and she probably just used the word always out of place. So if you can teach each of them to be more compassionate, to not jump immediately to the worst case scenario. Now, part of this number 4 skill is not jumping to conclusions, the number 3 skill. It's like teach them to live in the right now. You know, what's going on right now? What's not combined with 30 years of stuff or a lifetime of stuff. But let's, instead of reliving past mistakes and thinking that you're a terrible person or thinking your partner's a terrible person, let's decide, okay, we're really just talking about I'm being late for work. Are we going to scream and yell and throw stuff because I'm late getting home from work? Probably not, if we look at it as an episode or an event. Now, I get it. If it happens 6 days out of 10 work days, it feels like a lot. But you deal with them one at a time. You create context. You find out the big reason why. You talk about the needs that are getting met, and then you move forward in it. And so part of the living in the present will help you do the 5th tool. Help clients, and you as a therapist too, recognize your negative thought patterns. Like, catch yourself in those negative patterns. Catch yourself thinking things like, I'm misunderstood and that means I'm going to get hurt. Or whenever I feel like set aside or pushed away, I feel like I need to get more aggressive and more pushy. And so in my world, what I have to remember is people that ignore me or don't understand me probably are not my abusers. They're probably just people that are busy themselves or thinking about their own agenda and forgetting that we're having a conversation. So there's so many other reasons besides I'm being abused. And so if you would think through the lens and help your clients think through the lens that sometimes how you act triggers how they act towards you, and it becomes a very systemic negative cycle within the relationship. So really it'll go a long ways towards the process of I'm going to help my marriage by examining what I felt in that moment, just in the now, how I acted based upon how I felt and what that triggered in you, and then how you treated me. And so I'm really looking at my behavior first, and then I'm looking at your response to my behavior. Because the only place I have control is to change my behavior to trigger a different response. One person in a relationship can change the relationship. And it's simply by me recognizing, okay, when I do this, it triggers that response from my wife. So what if I change what I do to see if I can trigger a new response? So if I snap at my wife and tell her to quit doing what she's doing, it shuts her down and she's kind of like standoffish the rest of the evening with me. So I don't like that. It wasn't my point. I wanted her to be closer and more intimate with me. So what if I pull her into a hug and say, that hurt my feelings when you did that. Can we take a look at it? Then she says, oh my gosh, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. I love you so much. And so it changes the whole pattern. By me not snapping, me instead hugging, it got a whole different response from her. Now that's overly simplified, but you see my point there. Think through this, do some trauma work, identifying what patterns and what feelings and emotions spring from childhood abuse, helps them make sense of the abuse and their behavior today. It de-escalates just that recognition of what's happened to them and what it creates a softening of all of it. That's trauma work. That's helping a couple deal with their complex traumas inside the relationship. And it's basically the same process if you're with an individual working, you just work with them with you. And you help them identify the patterns. You help them identify how they can resolve the patterns by being aware of them. And I'd like you to give it a try. Let me know how this goes, and we'll see you next training.